Hello, Zero Gravitas here, and in today's episode we're going to be building this monster mobile compact ore crafter. Welcome back to our mountaintop mesa base. It's in a really great location, but we've been set up here since the middle of last year, so I think it's about time that we hit the road. As you can see, we're currently fabricating a whole bunch of crafting blocks. These are going to let us construct a separate mobile version of this compact crafting base. In the last few episodes we've had great fun playing around with drones steered by adjustment thrusters, and then hoverbug hybrid racers to complete better future missions on hard terrain in style. All of which has been great fun and demonstrated some interesting build tricks, but this was meant to be a crafting playthrough series and we've been neglecting that aspect, so it's high time we built a tech that can actually fabricate something for once. Now, we already explained in a bunch of detail back in episode 5 how this crafting base works, so we'll just cover the main points of that very quickly and you can go back and watch the episode if you want to see more. We demonstrated that you need a minimum of 4 component factories to craft the top tier blocks which use exotic components. One with each tier of component dongle and one without a dongle at all. Then we showed that you could make this setup slightly faster and more compact by arranging the component factories on both sides of the conveyor line. But the layout of the component dongles has to be just as strict if you want to avoid crafting jams. We also demonstrated why use of the smallest GSO node silos was preferable. Large silos full of resource chunks will cause a significant FPS drop on PC, and on console will put you over the block allowance limit. Arrays of smaller silos obviously take up less space, but they also allow the conveyor line for fetching resources to be shorter, which speeds up crafting times. And finally, we introduced the key concept of having a dedicated scrapper for each type of compressed resource block. It's a far more efficient storage system where the tiny silos act merely as an access point for automated crafting. And there we go, that was an abridged version of the key concepts behind this Pahonen, also known as butterfly, base. Now we're just going to fast forward through fabricating the remaining parts for the mobile crafting core. I'll not try saying that again 3 times fast. And there we go, that's all the blocks we need. Now, instead of just loading in the finished product, we're going to time-lapse through building it up from scratch so we can better see all its ins and outs. We're going to start with the array of 11 node silos, one for each type of refined resource. Very few block recipes actually require the unrefined versions of resources, and there are currently none at all that use the raw version of the most expensive crystals. Now just a quick note, it's very important to start building from your first cab in the same orientation as you'll want for your final tech. I failed to do that with this crafting base, instead having the first cab pointing sideways. What this means is, even if you reorient the primary cab to face the natural forward direction, all the new blocks you add will still point sideways as if that is the front. In addition to that, the arrow on the minimap will point the wrong way and enemies will tend to spawn in that direction too. This has long caused other problems, including with the control of build beam. But while it appears that that particular symptom has been cured in a recent unstable update, it's probably still best to avoid building this issue into your techs. Anyway, where were we? Ah yes, let's just reverse the conveyor direction so that resources travel towards the front, and then we're going to have them double back around underneath this line. We certainly could have this section pointing downwards, and that would look great on a hover base for sure, but we're going to be mounting the crafter on a ground vehicle, so I think this will work better with a lower conveyor facing upwards. This way we'll still see resources travelling along it from above, however weird that is. We'll add a dropper to the end of the conveyor to prevent it from clogging up with unneeded resources when we cancel fabrications. On the finished product, they'll be picked up by collectors and stored for later use. You could extend the conveyor to add more fabricators, but realistically you won't get more than 2 functioning simultaneously. And now to attach the dreaded component factories. These have got to be some of the most awkward blocks in the game to get oriented how you want them. We've got them upside down here because it saves 1 block of conveyor length, they attach better to the upper section, and they look cool to boot. Note that they should still work fine with the conveyor inverted, and resources won't even collide with the blocks of a tech that's holding them when it's on a fixed anchor. I'm making a point of highlighting the position of each dongle here, because the layout has to be so specific in order to be able to craft the higher level blocks. And of course the layout is flipped upside down compared to what we looked at earlier. That's the core crafting line completed. Now we're going to add the feed-in lines and scrappers to stock up the silos. On the Pahonen base, we used sloped conveyors to prevent adjacent lines from merging in an unpredictable fashion. The curved conveyors here do a similar thing, but we're also staggering the heights of the scrappers, because of course they're twice as wide as the silos. And in addition to this, we're going to create a 1 block gap between the scrappers, just to give a little bit of extra space for the compressed resource blocks stacked above their inputs. So we'll just fix my little mistake here by turning the curved conveyors sideways on these end scrappers. Note that we could turn the scrappers on end in a different build, I just didn't want the stack sticking out the side of our vehicle in this case. And that's our bare minimum setup to craft most blocks. Let's just stick a temporary anchor under here to save us holding it in build beam the entire time. And now we're going to add a couple of extra functions to make it more practical to use. Firstly, we're going to extend the conveyor line by a couple of blocks so we can squeeze in a filter. We can then enable this to divert resources to be sold by a couple of delivery cannons. This could be helpful to clear away the last few dregs of resources when decommissioning the system. To pull resources from a specific silo, you also have to set one of the fabricators to craft that type of compressed resource block. You could use those basic delivery cannons, but we're going to use the mobile variety instead, because they're a little more compact and they'll allow us to continue selling even after we anchor. By the way, don't forget to reset the filter if you want to avoid accidentally selling everything. Finally, because this is intended as a mobile setup, we're going to add an extended provision for collecting and utilising raw resources. We've just removed and re-added that block so that our new conveyor spur will have precedence, and you may be able to see that from the flow of the animation. We had to do this to create the very specific conveyor layout needed to circumvent the bug with refineries, where they appear to stall and wrongly allow resources past them. We looked at this in more detail in episode 2, but essentially it boils down to adding an extra piece of conveyor on the other side of the output port. And while we're talking about bugs, I should also note that the fabricators need to be able to see a refinery on their conveyor line in order to avoid a bug that prevents crafting top-tier blocks with this minimal component factory setup. Have you got all that? Anyway, we are going to add 4 large silos for holding harvested resources, which will give us a little more capacity than we had in total on our earlier determinist mobile crafter. And as with that build, we can connect collectors edge on to both silos so that they will automatically transfer resources to whichever one has spare space. But on this default build, we're going to mount the collectors flat to the side of the silos and instead rely on alternator conveyors to pull the resources around the 90 degrees between them. And I think that's just about it for the build. Now, what have I forgotten? Oh yes, a pacemaker. It's always great to be able to go 4 times faster. I'll snapshot this properly later to upload it to the Steam Workshop and include it in a zip file download linked in the description. Now, before we continue, I suppose I'd better reload this from the main snapshot I tested before recording this, just on the off chance we've forgotten anything else. Oh yeah, silly me. It's important to always have an SCU with this build to prevent any GSO blocks being picked up by the scrappers. You really have to make sure that they only get manually loaded with the correct type of resource blocks and don't pick up anything from the fabricators. And there you have it. Hang on, I forgot to put those scrappers on, didn't I? Oh wow, that is mind-boggling. I'll freeze frame there for a second so you can see the conveyor connections to them. But anyway, glaring errors aside, that is the crafting core completed now, so it's time to move on to fabricating the blocks that we'll need for the rest of the build. Yeah, that looks like quite a big production run, so we'll crank that out overnight, and in the meantime we'll pop over to R&D mode to take a look at some additional vehicle designs that utilise the same crafting core. Okay, so we're going to start off building the chassis by connecting to the blocks of the lower conveyor line. This is why it was preferable for them to be facing upwards, but you could also connect onto the sides of the component factories, which are very solid. And now we've got a bit of a GeoCorp battery slab, just to keep things super simple and solid in this first demonstration build. The big boy wheels are slow but strong, and you'll see loads of them on enemy techs in campaign. We're simply plonking shield bubbles all around the outside, and then this staircase set up for the weapons, which is also very popular, if somewhat unimaginative. We're moving the SCU to the back bumper, and then most importantly we need to include anchors which are able to reach the ground. Note that if you're very keen to have better ground clearance, you could always move an anchor block to the underside of your tech each time you want to set up for crafting. Now we're quickly filling the batteries up with a couple of wireless furnace chargers that we built in episode 6, and it does look like we could do with adding a few repair bubbles to cover the outside of the chassis too, but you get the idea here. It can be pretty straightforward to build a general purpose combat and all crafting tech, but if you do fancy spending a bit more time on your build, you could come up with something a little bit more unique like this. On the sides we've got the enormous Behemoth wheels with flail guards in between them, and on the back we've got a couple of boosters. Then at the front we've got a couple of raised weapon pylons, which extend over the wheels. The missile launchers right on the top should be better able to shoot over the tops of trees and other obstacles, while in theory the guns on the underside should be more able to shoot enemies at point blank range, right onto the front of our wheels, to the sides, and even behind. But you do have to be careful with this because you can actually damage and destroy resource chunks and blocks. We can see our repair bubbles healing some of those back up there. I'm not sure if the windmill flails will provide much defense, but like the Cerberus drills at the front, they're able to harvest resources without having to press space and fire all the weapons. The huge wheels do seem to smooth out driving over rough terrain, but we also have caterpillar tracks in between because we need such shallow ground clearance for the anchors to deploy. Now I did rediscover a little bug with the crafting core while I was doing this R&D demonstration. We were continually losing scrapped resources, even at low speeds. For some reason, the curved conveyors are very poor at holding on to resource chunks that are being pushed onto their surface. Now this isn't too much of a disaster, as we can prevent repeated resource drops by simply setting the pacemaker to pause, and the dropped resources get recollected into the front silos anyway. But I felt it would be best to simply negate this issue by making the right angle turn with an edge-on connection between regular conveyor blocks. So we'll go back to campaign and fix this issue with the crafting core, and I'll make sure it's correct before I upload the snapshot. And here we are finishing up fabricating the final venture blocks for the mobile monster crafter. It ended up taking a little while longer than I expected, working all the way through the night and most of the next day too. But we can go ahead and make those conveyor modifications whilst the base spits out the final mobile SCU. Now why is fabrication stalled on the base? That's unusual. I'll just reboot the crafting AI by removing and re-adding a block. That seems to have got it. Now where were we? Oh yes, you may have noticed that I've decided to keep the curved conveyor blocks. They don't seem to cause any problems when turned sideways like this, at least not on a wheel tech which is unable to stray from side to side. And then we're going straight ahead making a few more modifications to the standard build, ready for our final vehicle. We've added one fabricator from each of the first 3 corporations, hidden the cab underneath and removed the collectors ready for a different configuration. And now we're packing away all the SCUs in the area. Oops, there's the last venture block. And this is to stop them sucking up our loose blocks, as we use a little bit of video editing magic to do a reverse teardown. Hopefully this will give a rough idea of what's going on without doing a full tutorial, which would be virtually impossible for such a complex build. First off, we're adding a few trimmings to the crafting core itself to make it a bit more resilient. The essential shield and repair bubbles and just a couple of lights. And once again we're growing the main body of the tech built off the bottom of the crafting core. To try and synergize with the existing aesthetic, I tried to go with a kind of spindly insect-like design, which is a fun departure from boringly efficient brick-shaped techs. And you can see there that we've got anchors just inside of the front and rear wheels. We're trying to get them as close to the ground as possible whilst minimizing clearance issues when driving. Also in the end of each leg, of course, we have a shield and venture repair bubble to keep our wheels healthy, which is kind of important. On the front legs we've got GeoCorp flail guards for resource harvesting, and then on the back legs we've got boosters to give us a spurt of speed which will help with hills and such. We're stuffing a few of the lightweight little venture batteries into various nooks and crannies, and we're concealing 2 large GeoCorp batteries in the chest. That's still not very much power storage, so we're looking to stay out of close combat. And only a couple of solar generators because they won't be our main source of recharging. The resource collectors double up as the sides of the neck and there's a secondary cabin between them. And then finally, to hold my favourite weapons, the Venture avalanche launchers, we've got a couple of stylised weapons platforms either side of a saddle-shaped head, which kind of makes it look like a praying mantis and reminded me personally of the Idirian aliens in the book Consider Flaybas by Ian M. Banks, which is, incidentally, where I drew the name for this General Systems vehicle, from the main character, Bora Horza Gobuchul. Anyhow, science fiction tangents aside, let's get this anchored so we can stock it up with resources. Thanks to the new anchoring keyboard shortcut in version 1.2, we don't even have to click the on-screen button. We're going to start by putting oleite in this end scrapper. That's because we have a mobile furnace generator adjacent to its buffer silo, which we can manually flip around to turn it on and off. The oleite, or rather elastic when it's in its refined form, is a good choice for us because we mined a shed load of it in episode 6, but also because it produces power far more quickly than wood or even carbius, so we can just about get away with recharging our modest battery capacity using only a single furnace generator. Anyway, we're loading up our scrappers here in the same way that we did for our base in episode 5. The order of the resources doesn't matter too much as long as you stay consistent thereafter. And the trick to getting multiple blocks stacked up in the scrapper is to click on the rim from the side once you see a resource block previewed under your pointer. And now we're showing here that you could attach a second mobile furnace generator to the side of the carbius silo but this spot is a lot more awkward to access, so it's probably not worth it. And we're already fully charged, so we may as well remove that and continue on filling the scrappers. We could definitely fit 1 or 2 more blocks in each stack, but we probably don't want more than about 3 in there when we're moving around, and that's because when you unanchor, the physics optimizations are disabled and they'll take up more space, so it's more likely that 1 or 2 will get knocked off as they jostle around. And there we are, fully stocked and ready to go. How splendid. Now we just need to decommission the old base so we can be on our way. And we're going to watch through the whole process because it will be essentially the same for the mobile crafter too. First of all, we'll shave off all of the loose blocks that haven't been scrapped yet, and then we're going to reattach the GSO fabricators so that we can turn the majority of the buffered resources back into compressed blocks. Now each scrapper will hold 2 blocks worth of resources inside its internal buffer, but it's impossible to tell from face value how many are left, so it's easy to end up 1 or 2 chunks short of a full block. In which case you can simply rescrap a resource block to flush through the system and save the resources already in the fabricator from being deleted by cancellation. Then we can simply sell the awkward number of remaining resources by setting the filter to pull them off the conveyor to the delivery cannons before they can reach the fabricator. And we're able to select which type of resource to pull from silos and sell by selecting that type of resource block in one of the fabricators. Then of course we must remember to disable the filter before actually trying to fabricate any more blocks. To save time mucking around rescrapping any blocks, I think a good heuristic, or rule of thumb, would be to fabricate just 1 block of each resource type and then simply sell all the remainder. This will give us a bit of bonus cash, which I'm sure we can find a use for anyway. And of course this process will also deal with any raw resources stored in the large mixed silo. So there we go, all finished up, and we can send our trusty old base to inventory. If I can find a good place to right click on it without bringing up a UI interface. There we go. You served us well, old pal. Well, I guess we better sweep up a bit and say goodbye to the turrets too. Thank you for your service, Mr. Turret. You've helped to make my world a safer place. And you too there, thank you very much. Now we could just drive slightly closer to those remaining blocks to pick them up, but meh. And our final little helper? Actually no, let's leave you here to save the spot just in case we ever want to come back. But we will dispense with these loitering enemies as a bit of a firepower demonstration. At about 200 meters away, they're at the perfect range for our avalanche of missiles. Nice, that'll learn them. Now let's get off this damned mountain. No point in messing around. Geronimo! Well, that was a kind of anticlimactic landing. We barely lost any resources there at all. I suppose that's a good test of the holding power though. Now, as we were saying earlier, we could use the mobile SCUs on the sides for a drive-by collection of block debris, but we probably still won't bother all that much. They're mostly there just to stop the scrappers from picking up any stray blocks by mistake. So, without any further faffing around, let's get this show on the road. And we're going to head east because that's our least explored direction, and it's the direction we were heading in when we started this series. And here you can see the small flail guards doing a pretty decent job of destroying any resources that get in the way of the wheels. Well, okay, so they don't really cover the outside edge, but unlike the plasma cutters, they activate automatically on contact, so we don't have to fire off the whole swarm of missiles every time we want to harvest a little rock. Oh yeah, we'd better reclaim our transfer towers in case we need them later. But I'll leave that one by the trade station, just because. And there's a fitting sunset as we leave our mountaintop base behind. Oops, we don't want to lose too many of those erudite blocks. Maybe we should cut our stacks down to just 2 high. Well, of course we could just remove them all while we're travelling, but that wouldn't look nearly so ostentatious. Yeah, I think that'll do the trick. Finally, we are properly on our way, heading off across the deserts. And I've not been doing a very good job of keeping the camera angle steady, so I think we'd be better off ditching the uninterrupted time-lapse in favour of more traditional editing cuts as we proceed through the end of the episode. So I was hoping to find some GSO missions here to do on the way, to raise us up to level 5 and make the enemy spawns a bit more difficult and interesting, but it's looking like they don't have any, so it's time to skip forward and see what's happening later on. Oh, what are these strange rocks looming out of the darkness? I think this must be our first alien biome in this playthrough. Weird and wondrous as it is, these immovable pillars can be a little bit awkward for ground vehicles. I wonder if we can force our way through with the aid of build beam. And breathe in a bit, and out we pop. Now, this biome does have tasty little outcrops of high value crystal resources, but they actually yield very little compared to the mineable seams in other biomes. And this design isn't as good for mobile harvesting as a purpose-built tech. It's a little bit too big and cumbersome, and also, its bricking capability is bottlenecked by the single conveyor line for fetching resources from silos. So we're not going to spend too long harvesting here, we'll just pack up some of this wood to make space for the more valuable resources, and then we'll be on our way. These missiles really do make combat very light work. But weirdly, I have to admit that this tech can actually seem to struggle more to anchor on the relatively flat ground of the salt flats. Oh, but never mind, let's move to a safer distance to deal with this invader first, and then we'll finish collecting these and fabricating resource blocks after the coast is clear. And we can be generating some power whilst we're reversing. Just set the pacemaker to normal. And there he is. Leave this area, he says. How about no, I says. Ah, he's got cruise missiles! That's cheating! Phew, that could very easily have gone pretty nasty, but I think we're still in one piece, and we've got Hawkeye level 2 as a bonus. Yeah, those missiles hit us right in the face, and you can see the size of the splash damage there from all the blocks that are repairing. But we're still fine for power because our Venture repair bubbles are very efficient. And I'm not sure why we're anchored up, to be honest. We barely have any solar generating capacity, and we could probably have done with being a little bit further away next time. We did actually lose a couple of little blocks, so I'm just replacing those, including the main cab in the front there, so I'm glad we've got a backup in the rear. And finally we can stash the crystals we looted from the pillars biome, a little bonus celestite and erudite. And here we're a few fibron chunks short of a complete wood block, so we're reconnecting the silo array at the top, which will enable the fabricator to draw the last few chunks it needs from there instead. Alright, let's blow this joint and go find another trading station. And here we are, just like that. So let's see if they've got any GSA. Alright over there. Good, good. So, as we were saying... Oh, excellent, there's one. And I think we'll take that Better Future mission too. We might as well start catching them up with the other corporations' license levels. And the Better Future mission's actually closer, so we'll do that one first. Yeah, I don't think these low-level mission enemies are going to give us much difficulty. Especially not with their cabs sticking right out at the front. Oof, bonus style points there for the melee final blow. Of course, if we are struggling to anchor, there's no need to. We can simply detach the SCU from the back and place it down, like we did with our drone. And we can use the mobile furnace for the charging, of course. Okay, so time to earn some GSO brownie points by defending this helpless little tech from having his lunch money stolen by this band of robbers, who we're going to entirely obliterate. That seems totally proportionate. And seeing as we have another minute and a half of posing as the Judge Dredd of hallway monitors, we may as well multitask and do a bit of crafting. Right, so what are we short of? Oh yes, we can discover some of the new blocks that were added in a recent update. These dual autocannons look really cool. And let's set pacemaker to turbo. Okay, so it looks like there's some new GeoCorp bumpers to craft too. And there's a Venture Sonic Lance. I don't think it's going to be all that much use in campaign, to be honest, but there may be some creative uses for its no damage knockback capability. Ah, so these GeoCorp bumpers are awkward in that they use raw titanite ore. But of course that's no problem when we've got a mobile crafting base. We can simply uproot and go and harvest some. Oh, we can actually make use of our plasma cutter mandibles here to get the awkward rocks in between our flail guards. Oh, and there was some plumbite ore there, but no titanite unfortunately. I did mention that this tech wasn't ideally suited for harvesting, didn't I? But thankfully these avalanche weapon pylons are pretty flexible. Oh, let's just pick it up into build beam already. There we go, far more dignified. Just waiting for the missile turrets to turn around now. Sorted. I think this must be one of those steel reinforced trees. Nope, just more plumbite there. Woohoo, pay dirt. Right, let's unpause and finish this block off. And there we have it. And as anticlimactic as that may be, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up the episode right there, folks. So if you enjoyed the episode, by all means let me know in the comments. And if you have any questions about TerraTech in general, I'm happy to answer those down below too. So, I'm very sorry that this episode was so massively delayed, but hopefully if we manage to do a follow-up, we'll be looking at more purpose-built harvester briquetecs. And if we do manage to do that, then future viewers should be seeing a link to it on the right hand side of this ending screen.